And I have an old teacher of mine. Now she's not old. Anne Bogart is a theater director and creator, and I remember her telling us that artists are always writing the same story over and over again, and I agree with that. I think on some level, at least for me, there are different wrinkles of the same story that are always being. Cause I think we're working out all our trauma. I think that's why we do what we're doing. Is just, and I mean trauma on every level, which is a beautiful trauma, and also the ones that are more difficult. But I think that that's true. So commissions are what David was saying. You let it all go, and then you still have to write from that place, as wise Philip says. Let the body tell you. Let the body tell you.
Are there other questions from the audience?
There's a question from the young lady sitting next to me. Will there be post-performance discussions once the show is actually running?
On Sundays, after the 4 o'clock matinee, we will do a post-show each week. And then for groups that, if there's like a by the house situation, or we'll include.
Or you could have us over for dinner and we'll talk.
We'll talk for food.
Yeah.
It seems that to some extent you were all sort of disappointed in the results. Did it make you ask the question, what is the question I'm asking within myself?
I mean, I have to say, I wasn't disappointed or elated by the results. They sort of were what they were, and they are what they are, and that was just part of what I consumed in trying to find the story that I wanted to tell. So I can't, it would be dishonest for me to say that I was disappointed, and I can't say that, because it really was a matter of just looking at it and saying, that's interesting, glad to know that history, who am I today? And then to listen to the genealogists and really be struck by the fact that, we live in a society where breasts are everywhere. There are 7 Victoria's Secret magazines in my mailbox, every other week. I don't know where they come from. And we live in a society that's obsessed and often defines women by breasts. And I thought, what happens? That's why I was so struck. What happens when a woman no longer has her breasts? How is she defined as a woman? How does she define herself as a woman? And so if it was a different track, it was a left field, but it started with the DNA, but it took me in a different direction that had to do with the position of women in society and how we define beauty and how we define identity. So I'm not disappointed at all, because it led me down a very interesting path.
I did wonder what I was asking when I was admittedly kind of bummed out. I mean, I still found it fascinating, but I was bummed out that it was pretty much my tight-knit Indian family is pretty much, I mean, at least in deep history, seems to be a tight-knit Indian family. And so I thought, well, why am I disappointed? I love my family. And I think it's because, like many people and many artists, presumably, I've always felt so different from, I have this huge family, My mother has 9 siblings, my father has 8 siblings, they all have several kids each, and I'm the sort of black sheep of our entire big family. And I thought, well, I'll find something somewhere along the way that'll say, this is why there's a streak of, I don't know, Zulu warrior in your, whatever it is. So I think it was a matter of, the whole process for me has been about examining, like I finally felt, we were talking about this last night after we arrived at the airport. For the last year and a half, I feel like I've had this permission to examine my own ideas and biases about race and identity in a way that I don't feel in my normal life. I have the permission to do, without sounding incredibly self-conscious about race and ethnicity, and Velina articulates it so beautifully whenever she talks about the slippery slope of trying to pinpoint identity. And so I realized that my disappointment had to do with feeling unable to examine these things closely enough, So.
I think it reinforced for me the way in which group identity in humans is always kind of a construct. I mean, it's always, or to put it positively, as Shashir did, we make our own families. Right. And we may choose to organize that group identity along ethnic lines. We may choose to organize it against around what our haplogroups are. But it's all, I often think of Chinese history and the degree to which the Han people, which are the majority race in China, identify with the first emperor, the guy who built the the Great Wall and the terracotta warriors and everything. And actually, you know, he wasn't really Han. He was, you know, he was a different ethnicity. But it has become convenient to construct Han identity around that. So it's all kind of what we choose to make it. And taking the DNA test kind of re-emphasized that for me.
For about a 12-hour period, I thought I had Scottish ancestry because it's something that was, I guess, misread in one of my haplogroups. So I spent a good part of those 12 hours, you know, trying to access every Scottish, I don't know, image and idea that I'd had somewhere in my, you know, I don't know, kilts and bagpipes and all sorts, and get really excited, yeah, about, you know, being Scottish because it was, and then it was determined, no, it was actually Northern Fertile Crescent, so I'm not Scottish.
Yeah.
You might have had a very different play if you'd written in that 12 hours.
But also the interesting question is, but what is Scottish? You see,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we think about, you know, oh, this is Scottish, and that is Irish, and that is African American, that is Mexican American. But if you look back far enough, you'll see, for instance, that, you know, that for instance, Mexican blood, 88% of what we call Mexican Americans come from a multiracial background. Many African Americans are of multiracial background. Hawaiians, you know, 66% of that state are people of mixed race background. So how we conceive and put a label on something, and then people sort of cleave to that identity, you know, for good reasons, because everyone is looking for a way to belong, to create a sense of belonging. I mean, we have to consider that too in the equation. Because my husband's from Northern England. He said, Scottish people are mutts. They came from everywhere, you know. They put on a kilt and suddenly it's Scottish, you know. So.
But the thing that's interesting is that I think ultimately we all come from Africa.
Right.
I mean, it really, I mean, I know that there have been years of like sort of debate and trying to push that away because, you know, because of the racial issues that we've all dealt with over the years. And that fear of that origin, you know, and I'm from East Africa. So I grew up in East Africa, so I'm like happy we're from East Africa, even though I'm, you know, believe me, the Indians who lived there didn't call themselves African, they called themselves Kenyan. So see, there's always those ways of dividing yourself from that African ancestry of yourselves. And so I love that. I've been fascinated with ever since I saw the story of man and all of this, like the fact that the science is bringing us back to that. And if we want to look for unity, look for it there in Africa.
Well, and most recently, there's science coming out that there were that we originated at the same time in multiple places. So that the out of Africa theory is still being not challenged, but we're still learning about.
But those theories have been throughout.
Right.
They have, those have been, because that to me is the argument about, no, it didn't really start in Africa. That's part of what, I think that's very, it's interesting because, you know, the same thing about the Bible, right? The Bible was, Adam and Eve weren't just in this particular place. They were all these multiple Adam and Eves that went all over, that were sprung up at the same time.
Also, the notion of the multiplicities, they say, come from the fact that while the DNA was in Africa, that there were many, quote unquote, daughters and sons of this DNA that migrated to other places, so that other cultures actually began because of the cross migrations, not necessarily from the original in Africa, which creates a notion of multiplicity. So it just complicates things even more so.